and welcome to another episode of Down to Disness, a monthly series where I pick a Disney animated movie, talk about its history and its impact on pop culture. This month's movie is Pete's Dragon, released in 1977, and I'm doing my first ever episode of Down to Disness on an animated movie mixed with live action, in honor of course, the remake of Pete's Dragon, which was released just this month. Despite the fact that I recognize that Pete's Dragon is a weird movie, it's one of my absolute favorite Disney movies of all time. The story of Pete's Dragon was originally based off of a short story written by Seton Miller and S.S. Field. Disney acquired the rights to the story in the 50s, and it was intended to be a part of the Wonderful World of Color lineup, but it was shelved until the 70s when they decided to make it into its own motion picture. The studio had just recently made Mary Poppins and thought that they would have another cash hit with a movie that mixed live action and animation. Unfortunately, they were wrong, and Pete's Dragon was a financial mistake for the Disney company, to say the least. It didn't really make that much money, and not a lot of people liked it. Even today, it only has like a 48% on Rotten Tomatoes. Like I said, since Mary Poppins had just been made, the idea of mixing live action and animation together wasn't that crazy. Disney had actually been doing it since the 1920s. But of course, no one was doing it as well as Disney was doing it, as with most things in animation. But on top of that, something I noticed in my rewatch of Pete's Dragon is that the special effects for this movie are pretty dang amazing for the 70s. When Elliot is cooking apples for Pete, when his footprints appear in wet cement, it's all really amazing special effects for the time that the movie was made. Funny enough, originally, Elliot was supposed to remain invisible for the entirety of the film. Gradually, the animation team at the studio lobbied for there to be more and more Elliot in the movie. They eventually got the studio heads to agree to have him in the finale of the film only, and then increased his screen time all the way up to 22 minutes. I know that doesn't sound like a lot of screen time, but in fact, animators Don Bluth, Gary Goldman, and John Pomeroy spent so much overtime animating this movie. The three of them would regularly work over 100-hour weeks, and when they went to their supervisors and asked for overtime pay, they were told that instead they would be given 1 hour off per hour of overtime worked. At the end of production, they each had 6 straight weeks of time off from all the overtime that they worked. And the three of them actually used those 6 weeks to work on their personal project, Banjo the Woodpile Cat. Don Bluth, of course, is an animator famous for making a lot of non-Disney animated movies like American Tail, but this was back when he had a short stint at the Disney Animation Company. Pete's Dragon was actually the first Disney animated movie to have none of the 9 old men working on it. However, very famous Disney animator Ken Anderson did work on this film, and specifically obviously animated Elliot, and it was the last movie that he worked on for the Disney company. Anderson actually spent a lot of his early life in East Asia, and so he decided to design Elliot as kind of a Chinese style dragon. And this was an important choice because typically, culturally, dragons in Chinese culture are seen as good, whereas dragons in American culture are seen as evil. Another very famous producer and director from the Disney company worked on Pete's Dragon, and his name is Don Hahn. He produced probably all of your favorite Disney movies from the Disney Renaissance, and he worked on Pete's Dragon under the supervision of Don Bluth, which helped when he went on to work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the 80s. There was actually a very special process used to mix live action and animation at the Disney studios at the time, and it was called the sodium vapor process, which sounds like a science project, and it kind of is. This process included a prism that would separate sodium vapor lights from the rest of the colors on the screen. It would project a yellow light onto the background behind an actor, which allowed them to substitute backgrounds in behind the actor whenever they wanted. Kind of like an old-fashioned green screen in a way, but it's really how they were able to put animated characters into a live-action world believably. So that's kind of a little bit about the animated side of Pete's Dragon, but let's talk about the live-action side of Pete's Dragon, which we're not used to doing on this show because it's usually just about animation. Usually I only get to talk about the voice cast of a movie, but this time I get to talk about literal actors, of which there are obviously many in Pete's Dragon. Disney actually considered having Olivia Newton-John play Nora for this movie, but she was not available, and so Helen Reddy got the part. She said that she took the role specifically so that her grandchildren someday would have something that they would be able to watch her in. Helen Reddy, of course, sang the song Candle on the Water for this movie, which was actually nominated for Best Song at the Academy Awards. Unfortunately, it didn't win. It lost to You Light Up My Life, but still a pretty great nomination to have under your belt. Disney. Candle on the Water is actually the entire reason that this movie is even a musical. Al Kasha and Joel Hirschhorn were hired to write Candle on the Water, and the studio was so into that song that they decided to make the whole movie a musical and hired the two to write the entire score. I would say that they went above and beyond in their making of this movie into a musical because this movie has so many songs. The most famous actor in this movie, arguably, is Mickey Rooney, who plays Nora's father. There's a specific scene where Mickey Rooney and Red Buttons are walking to the cave where Elliot is staying in order to spot him, and they're drunk and they're walking along being silly. And that scene was actually ad-libbed with the two actors trying to be as slapstick as possible and one-up each other, and you can kind of tell when you watch it. Weirdly, in my research, I never saw anyone point this out, and maybe I only care because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, but Dr. Terminus in Pete's Dragon is played by Jim Dale, who voices the Harry Potter audiobooks. Harry. And you probably never would have guessed because Elliot doesn't really say any words, but he's voiced by a very famous actor, Charlie Callis. While this movie is set in Maine, it was actually filmed in California. The crew built a lighthouse for this movie so that they could actually have a real lighthouse for all of their lighthouse needs. And they had to receive permission from the Coast Guard to use the lighthouse because it was a working lighthouse. The light was really bright. So they needed to talk to the Coast Guard because ships were gonna get confused otherwise. They actually wanted to move the lighthouse to Disneyland after production ended, but it kind of fell apart before they had a chance to do so. Since this movie was released and popular at the turn of the 70s to the 80s, it has a nice history in home video entertainment. Never thought you'd get excited about VHS tapes on Down to Disness, did you? This was the first Disney movie that Disney released on their own home video outlet. It had been released on other outlets like DiscoVision, but it was the first one that Disney put out on their own home video entertainment system. I think a lot of the reasons why I love Pete's Dragon are obviously because I grew up with it, but there are a lot of charming aspects to the movie that just don't happen in a lot of movies today. For example, the fact that the actor that plays Pete is not a really well-trained actor. This was like his first time acting ever. It was such a weird time after Walt was gone. People kind of didn't know what they were doing for a few decades there between the mid-60s to the mid-80s. Between Walt's death and the Disney Renaissance, a lot of weird stuff happened, and this is my favorite weird thing from that era. Elliot has been one of my top 3 favorite Disney characters for my entire life. I love him to pieces. And despite the fact that I wasn't a big fan of the Pete's Dragon remake that came out this year, I am happy that kids today are getting to experience a Pete's Dragon movie and maybe being influenced to watch the original, because it's great. So if you haven't watched it, I recommend you watching it, despite how long it is, because it's very long. Let me know in the comments down below what you love about Pete's Dragon. Of course, I know a lot of you will mention the Main Street Electrical Parade float. How could we forget that? As always, leave a comment down below letting me know which movie you'd like me to do next month on Down to Disness. And in the meantime, stay magical, and I'll see you very soon for another video on this channel. Bye! It's my choices for things that I think are fun for children and fun for parents and guardians.